The stars had never seemed so cold. Commander Zexara pressed her 4 hands against the viewing window of New Haven Station and watched another ship burn in the darkness. The Vorthak had found them again. The crystalline warships moved like silver death through space, their weapons turning coalition vessels into clouds of glowing gas. That was the last of the Centauri defense fleet, reported Captain Veltar from his console. The bird-like Astari's feathers were flat against his head, a sign of deep fear. 47 ships destroyed in less than an hour. Zexara's skin changed, from its normal blue to a sick gray color. Her people, the Quillen, showed emotion through their skin. Right now, she felt nothing but despair. "How many systems have we lost this month?" 6, said the floating gas being that called itself Neb Alpha. The Nebulan's colors pulsed dim and sad. "The Vorthak are moving faster now. They don't even try to capture our worlds anymore. They just destroy everything and move on. The emergency." Council chamber filled with the sounds of defeat. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the holographic table, and all of them looked broken. The Vorthak Empire had been conquering the galaxy for 10 years now. What started as border raids had become total war. The enemy was simply too strong. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their shields nearly impossible to break. Worse, they seemed to know every move the coalition would make before they made it. Every trap failed. Every ambush turned into a massacre. Every defensive position became a tomb. "We have to face the truth," said Admiral Corks, the oldest member of the council. His metal body showed deep scratches from a dozen battles. "We cannot win this war. Maybe it's time to surrender." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some agreed with the old admiral. Others shouted about fighting to the last ship. But Zexara noticed that no one offered a real solution. They had run out of ideas months ago. "Wait," she said, raising all 4 arms. The chamber fell silent. "There is one option we haven't tried, the Hero Protocol." Captain Veltar's beak clicked nervously. "Commander, that protocol is thousands of years old. It was created when our ancestors still believed in legends and fairy tales." "Desperate times," said Zexara. She moved to the central console and began entering codes that hadn't been used in living memory. The Hero Protocol was designed for exactly this situation. When all conventional options have failed, when our civilization faces total destruction, we send out a call for help. Not to governments or fleets, but to individuals, heroes. The ancient system came online with a deep humming sound. Warning lights flashed as power flowed to the long-range communications array. The protocol was simple, but powerful. It would send a distress signal to every star system in the galaxy, asking for heroes to come and save them. "This is foolish," muttered Admiral Corks. "Heroes are stories we tell children. In the real world, there are only soldiers and weapons and politics." But Zexara was already recording the message. Her voice carried across space, reaching planets she had never seen and species she had never met. "To all who receive this transmission, the Galactic Coalition faces extinction. The Vorthak Empire has conquered most of our worlds and destroyed our fleets. We have tried everything within our power and failed. If there are heroes among the stars, if there are those who fight not for profit or politics but because it is right, we beg you to answer our call. Our coordinates follow. We offer what little we have left in payment, but we understand if it is not enough. Time is running out. Please, if anyone can hear this, help us." The message broadcast on all frequencies, racing across the galaxy at faster than light speed. Then they waited. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then the responses began to arrive. The first came from the warrior monks of Andros. Their reply was polite but brief. They were already fighting a war against the Machine Collective and could spare no ships. The second message came from the legendary ghost fleet of the Void Runners. They demanded payment in advance and wanted to see proof that the Coalition could afford their services. More messages followed. Some species offered sympathy but no help. Others wanted to negotiate terms before committing any forces. A few sent messages of support but explained they were too far away to be useful. By the end of the week, The coalition had received over 300 responses. Most were polite refusals. Some were demands for payment they couldn't afford. Others were from groups that wanted to hire them instead of helping them. "Nothing," said Captain Veltar during the morning briefing. 300 messages and not one offer of real help. Zexara felt her skin shift to a darker gray. She had put all her hopes into the hero protocol, and it had failed just like everything else. Maybe Admiral Corks was right. Maybe heroes really are just stories. That's when the final message arrived. It was different from the others. The signal was weak and filled with static, as if it came from very far away. The language was harsh and crude, full of sounds that made the translation. Computers work overtime. When they finally decoded it, the message was surprisingly short. "Coalition forces, this is Earth Command. We received your distress call. Message understood, we're coming. Estimated arrival time is 3 months. Hold the line until we get there. Earth out." The council chamber fell completely silent. Everyone stared at the holographic display showing the message details. The signal had come from a star system near the edge of the galaxy, from a world that most species avoided. "Earth?" whispered Neb Alpha. "Isn't that the Deathworld system we cataloged years ago?" Zexara checked the files. Earth was listed as a Class 12 Deathworld, meaning it was extremely dangerous to most known forms of life. The planet had violent weather, unstable geology, and atmosphere that was toxic to many species. Most importantly, it was inhabited by a primitive species that had barely developed spaceflight. "The humans," said Captain Veltar, reading from the file. "Pre-warp civilization. Violent, territorial, constantly fighting wars among themselves. Average lifespan of 60 to 80 years. They reproduce by biological methods and show high levels of aggression." Admiral Corks's mechanical voice carried a tone of disgust. "We asked for heroes and we get barbarians from a poison world. This is what desperation has brought us to." But Zexara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was real. They're the only ones who said yes. Everyone else wanted money or made excuses or tried to negotiate. These humans just said they're coming. "Because they're too primitive to understand what they're facing," argued Veltar. "The Vorthak will destroy them in minutes." "Maybe," said Zexara. "But maybe being primitive is exactly what we need. The Vorthak have defeated every civilized fleet in the galaxy. They know how we think, how we fight, how we plan our battles. But they've never faced anyone like these humans." She looked around the chamber at the defeated faces of her fellow commanders. "We have nothing left to lose. If the humans want to try, let them try. At worst, we'll buy ourselves a few more weeks." The meeting ended with reluctant agreement. They would wait for the humans to arrive. Though most of the council expected it to be a brief and tragic encounter, the Vorthak Empire had crushed every enemy they had faced. What could one small fleet from a backward world possibly do? Zexara returned to her quarters and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beings she had never met were traveling across the galaxy to help her people. They didn't know her. They didn't owe her anything. They had never seen her world or met her species. But they were coming anyway. She didn't know what humans looked like or how they fought or what they believed. And she only knew that when the galaxy called for heroes, they were the ones who answered. 3 months seemed like a very long time to wait. 3 months passed like a bad dream. The Vorthak Empire continued its relentless advance, crushing 2 more coalition systems while the aliens waited for help from Earth. Commander Zexara had almost convinced herself that the human message was a mistake or a cruel joke when the proximity alarms began screaming. "Unknown ships dropping out of hyperspace," reported Captain Veltar from his station. His feathers stood on end as he studied the sensor readings. 15 vessels, configuration unknown. Zexara rushed to the command center of New Haven Station. Through the viewing windows, she could see the human fleet hanging in space like a collection of metal scars against the stars. The ships looked nothing like proper vessels. They were angular, brutal things covered in weapon mounts and armor plating. Most showed signs of hasty repairs and battlefield modifications. "Those are warships," whispered Admiral Corks. His mechanical voice carried a note of surprise. "Every one of them is built for fighting." The lead ship was larger than the others, a converted mining vessel that someone had turned into a floating weapons platform. Railguns and missile pods stuck out from its hull like spikes on an angry animal. Along its side, painted in crude human letters, were the words UES Vengeance. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of a human ship. The bridge was cramped and functional with no decorations or comfortable seating. Everything looked designed for war. Standing in the center was a human male wearing a simple uniform marked with symbols of rank. He was shorter than most coalition species, with pale skin and dark hair that showed gray at the edges. His face carried scars from old battles, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen too much death. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an undertone of controlled violence. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress call 3 months ago. We're here to deal with your Vorthak problem." Commander Zexara stepped forward, trying to hide her shock at the human's direct manner. Most species began diplomatic contacts with formal greetings and cultural exchanges. "Admiral Morrison, I am Commander Zexara of the Galactic Coalition. We are grateful for your response, but I must warn you that the situation is more dire than our original message indicated. The Vorthak have superior technology and overwhelming numbers." Morrison's expression didn't change. "We read the intelligence reports you broadcast. Doesn't change anything. We came here to fight, so let's fight." Another human appeared on the screen, a female with short red hair and calculating eyes. She wore the uniform of a tactical officer and carried herself like a predator studying prey. "Admiral, I'm picking up massive energy readings from the Coalition fleet. Those are some impressive shield generators." "Lieutenant Katie Walsh, my tactical officer," Morrison explained to Zexara. "Katie, meet the Coalition commander. She's the one who called for help." Walsh nodded briefly at the screen. "Ma'am, nice station you've got here. Good defensive positions, multiple escape routes. Someone knows how to build for survival." Zexara felt unsettled by the human woman's clinical assessment of their base. It was like being examined by a hunting animal that was deciding whether you were prey or competition. "We should meet in person," Zexara suggested, trying to regain some diplomatic control. "There are protocols to follow, documents to sign, formal agreements to negotiate." Morrison shook his head. "No time for ceremonies. Every minute we waste talking is another minute your enemy uses to get stronger. Send us the location of their next target and we'll handle it." "Admiral, you don't understand," protested Captain Veltar, moving into view of the transmission. "The Vorthak Empire has conquered 17 star systems. Their technology is centuries ahead of anything we possess. They've destroyed fleets 10 times larger than yours." For the first time, Morrison smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Good. That means they'll be confident. Confident enemies make mistakes." The connection ended abruptly, leaving the Coalition command staff staring at a blank screen. In all their years of diplomatic contact with other species, none of them had ever encountered anything like the humans. They were direct to the point of rudeness, seemed utterly unconcerned with proper procedures, and showed no fear of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy. "They're insane," muttered Admiral Corks. "Completely insane." But Commander Zexara found herself thinking about Morrison's scarred face and cold eyes. Those weren't the features of an insane being. They were the features of someone who had fought many battles and survived them all. 2 hours later, a human shuttle docked with New Haven Station. Zexara and her senior staff waited in the main conference room, expecting a formal delegation with advisors and translators. Instead, only 3 humans entered the room. Admiral Morrison looked even more intimidating in person. He was built like a warrior, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that had clearly seen combat. Beside him walked Lieutenant Walsh, whose green eyes seemed to catalog every weakness in the room's defenses. The third human was an older woman with gray hair and the confident bearing of a scientist. "Dr. Lisa Grant," Morrison said by way of introduction. "She's here to study your technology and see what we can learn about the Vorthak." Dr. Grant immediately approached Commander Zexara with undisguised curiosity. "Fascinating bone structure. Your species evolved from aquatic creatures, didn't you? The way your joints move suggests you're adapted for three-dimensional movement. Zexara's skin flushed with embarrassment. No one had ever examined her so openly before. Dr. Grant, perhaps we could discuss xenobiology later. Right now we need to plan our defense strategy. This is strategy, Grant replied, pulling out a small device and scanning the Quillen commander. If we're going to work together, I need to understand your capabilities and limitations. For instance, your skin color changes indicate emotional states, which could be useful for psychological warfare. Lieutenant Walsh was examining the holographic display showing coalition fleet positions. Defensive formations are too spread out, she observed. You're trying to cover too much territory with too few ships. Classic mistake. We have to protect our colonies, protested Captain Veltar. No, you have to win the war, Walsh corrected. Everything else is secondary. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical displays showing recent Vorthak attacks. His expression grew thoughtful as he traced the enemy's movement patterns. They're methodical. Same approach every time. Form up in standard battle lines, overwhelm your defenses with superior firepower, move on to the next target. That's what makes them so effective, said Admiral Corks. Their tactics are flawless. Their tactics are predictable, Morrison replied. They've been fighting civilized opponents for so long they've forgotten how to deal with chaos. Dr. Grant finished her scans and moved on to examine the station's technology. She asked rapid-fire questions about power systems, weapons, and defensive capabilities. To the aliens, her interest seemed almost predatory. Your energy shields are impressive, she noted, but they're tuned to deflect the weapons your own species use. Have you ever tested them against kinetic projectiles? High-velocity solid rounds? Why would we? Asked Zexara. Kinetic weapons were abandoned centuries ago. They're inefficient compared to energy weapons. Dr. Grant and Lieutenant Walsh exchanged glances. They seemed to be communicating without words, like predators coordinating an attack. Show us everything you know about the Vorthak, Morrison demanded. Ship designs, weapons, tactics, anything you've got. For the next hour, the Coalition officers presented their intelligence. The Vorthak used crystalline ships that could regenerate damage. Their energy weapons could cut through any known armor. Their shields had never been penetrated by Coalition forces. They fought in perfect formations with mechanical precision. The humans listened in silence, occasionally asking questions that seemed strange or irrelevant. Did the Vorthak ships have backup life support systems? How did they handle debris in combat zones? What happened to their formation integrity if the command ship was destroyed? You're thinking about this all wrong, Morrison finally said. You keep trying to fight them on their terms with their rules, that's why you lose. What do you suggest? Asked Commander Zexara. Morrison's smile was cold and predatory. We fight dirty. Dr. Grant looked up from her data pad. Admiral, I've identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their ship design. Their shields are optimized for energy weapons but should be vulnerable to mass drivers. Their formations assume rational opponents who won't sacrifice ships for tactical advantage. Their biggest weakness, added Lieutenant Walsh, is that they've never fought anyone crazy enough to ram them. The alien stared in horror at the suggestion. Ramming attacks were considered barbaric, wasteful, and absolutely prohibited under the rules of civilized warfare. That's suicide, protested Captain Veltar. That's victory, Morrison replied. The Vorthak expect you to value your ships and crews above your mission. They don't know how to fight an enemy that's willing to trade lives for objectives. Commander Zexara felt her skin shift to deep purple, a color that indicated profound unease. These humans weren't heroes in any sense she understood. They were something far more dangerous. The Kepler system had been peaceful until the Vorthak arrived. Now 12 crystalline warships hung in space like silver daggers, systematically destroying everything that moved. They had already reduced 2 Coalition supply convoys to glowing debris and were moving toward the civilian evacuation ships with mechanical precision. Commander Zexara watched from the bridge of the Coalition command vessel Harmony as the enemy fleet arranged itself in perfect diamond formation. Each Vorthak ship was a work of art. its crystal hull reflecting starlight in beautiful patterns. Their weapons charged with deadly efficiency, preparing to turn the fleeing civilian ships into expanding clouds of plasma. "The evacuation ships won't make it to the jump point," reported Captain Veltar, his feathers flat with despair. "The Vorthak will intercept them in 20 minutes. "Where are the humans?" demanded Admiral Corks. His mechanical voice carried anger and frustration. "They said they would be here." Zexara studied the tactical display. The Vorthak formation was flawless, as always. Their shields were at full power, their weapons ready, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. In her experience, this was the moment when coalition forces would retreat or be destroyed. That's when 15 new contacts appeared on the sensors. The human ships dropped out of hyperspace at maximum velocity, already firing before they fully materialized. Unlike every other fleet Zexara had ever seen, they showed no formation discipline whatsoever. Each ship attacked from a different angle, following no apparent plan except to cause as much chaos as possible. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. The main screen showed Captain Steve Phillips on the bridge of the UES Hammer. His ship was one of the smaller human vessels, a converted cargo hauler that looked like it had been rebuilt by someone who only cared about fitting more weapons onto it. Phillips himself was a thin man with nervous energy and eyes that seemed to find humor in everything. "Coalition forces, this is Hammer Actual. We're going in hot. Suggest you keep your distance unless you want to get splashed by debris." The connection cut off before anyone could respond. Zexara watched in horror as the human ships accelerated directly into the Vorthak formation. Every principle of space combat said this was suicide. You didn't charge a superior enemy head-on. You used formations, tactics, coordinated attacks. The humans ignored every rule of civilized warfare. The Vorthak fleet responded exactly as Zexara expected. Their beautiful ships turned with perfect synchronization, bringing their weapons to bear on the approaching humans. Energy beams lanced out, each one capable of vaporizing a coalition cruiser. The first salvo should have destroyed half the human fleet. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships moved like living things, twisting and diving through the energy barrage with reflexes that seemed almost supernatural. Where coalition vessels were built for comfort and efficiency, these ships were pure predators. Every system was designed for war, with no wasted space for anything that didn't help them kill or survive. The UES Hammer took a direct hit that would have crippled any coalition ship. Instead of exploding, it kept coming. Atmosphere vented from multiple hull breaches, but Captain Phillips's voice came over the radio, calm and almost cheerful. "Hammer to all units. We've got their attention. Recommend immediate attack while they're focused on us." What followed defied everything Zexara thought she knew about space combat. The human ships fought like a pack of wild animals, each one attacking independently but somehow working together. When one ship's engines failed, it used emergency thrusters to ram itself into a Vorthak vessel. When another lost its main weapons, the crew started firing handheld projectiles through the damaged hull. "They're insane," whispered Admiral Corks, but his voice carried a note of awe. Dr. Lisa Grant's voice came over the command frequency from her position aboard the UES Vengeance. "Coalition forces, we're reading massive structural damage to the enemy formation. Their shields are calibrated for energy weapons but can't handle kinetic impacts at these velocities." Captain Phillips proved her point by launching every missile his ship carried, then ramming the empty launcher tubes into a Vorthak cruiser. The alien ship's perfect crystal hull cracked like glass, venting atmosphere and crew into space. "How are they doing this?" asked Captain Veltar, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Zexara was beginning to understand. The Vorthak had fought dozens of species over the years, but all of them had been civilized. They used predictable tactics, followed established rules of engagement, and valued the lives of their crews above mission objectives. The humans did none of these things. When Sergeant Amy Rodriguez's ship lost its main guns, she didn't retreat for repairs. Instead, she vented the cargo bay atmosphere to propel debris at enemy shields. When the debris ran out, she started throwing pieces of her own ship. "This is Rodriguez to all units," her voice crackled over the radio. I'm reading critical failures across all systems. Recommend immediate evacuation. Negative, Rodriguez, came Captain Phillips' reply. Can you still maneuver? Barely. Got maybe 5 minutes of thruster fuel left. Then ram something big. Rodriguez's ship, barely holding together, accelerated toward the largest Vorthak vessel. The enemy tried to destroy it with concentrated fire, but the human craft was too small and moving too erratically. When it impacted the crystal ship's main engine, both vessels disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire. The Vorthak formation, which had maintained perfect discipline for the first part of the battle, began to show signs of confusion. Their commanders had no experience with enemies that treated their own ships as expendable weapons. When they tried to target the most dangerous human vessels, others would ram them from unexpected angles. Lieutenant Walsh's voice came over the command frequency from the UES Vengeance. Admiral Morrison, I'm detecting command confusion in the enemy formation. They're trying to maintain formation integrity while dealing with random attack vectors. Understood, Morrison replied. His voice was as calm as if he were discussing the weather. All units concentrate fire on the command vessel. If we take out their leader, the rest should lose coordination. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. The remaining human ships, most of them damaged beyond what any sane crew would consider functional, converged on the Vorthak flagship. They came from all directions at once, firing everything they had. The crystalline command ship was beautiful, a work of art that had never been seriously damaged in decades of conquest. Its shields had turned aside the most powerful weapons the Coalition could deploy. But it had never faced an enemy that used nuclear reactors as guided missiles. Captain Jenny Brooks commanded a converted mining ship that had been held together with hull patches and determination. When her weapon systems failed, she made a decision that horrified every civilized observer. She overloaded her reactor and aimed her ship at the Vorthak flagship's bridge. This is Brooks. Tell my kids I love them. Hammer down. The mining ship, moving at combat velocity with an overloading nuclear reactor, hit the Vorthak command vessel amidships. The explosion lit up the entire system, turning both ships into a brief new star. The effect on the remaining Vorthak fleet was immediate and devastating. Without their command ship, the perfect formation fell apart. Individual captains tried to maintain discipline, but they had no experience with independent action. They had been trained to follow orders, not to think for themselves. The surviving human ships, now numbering only 6, pressed their attack with relentless fury. They showed no mercy, no hesitation, no concern for their own survival. They fought like creatures that had evolved in hell and learned that the only way to survive was to be more dangerous than anything trying to kill them. When the battle ended, all 12 Vorthak ships were destroyed or crippled. The human fleet had been reduced to 6 barely functional vessels, but Captain Phillips's voice still came over the radio, cheerful and undefeated. Kepler system is secure. Coalition forces, you can come collect your survivors now. Commander Zexara stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. The Vorthak Empire had just lost an entire fleet to a force 1/3 its size. Ships that had conquered star systems had been reduced to scrap metal by converted cargo haulers and mining vessels. How? She whispered. Dr. Grant's voice provided the answer. Commander, the Vorthak have been fighting civilized opponents for so long, they forgot what real war looks like. They expect rational behavior, predictable tactics, and opponents who value survival over victory. They've never faced anyone crazy enough to use their own ships as bullets. Admiral Corks's mechanical voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. Those aren't heroes, they're monsters. Maybe, said Morrison's voice over the radio. But they're your monsters now. And the Vorthak just learned they're not the most dangerous thing in this galaxy anymore. The human ships limped away from the battle zone, already planning their next attack. Behind them, the Kepler system was safe. The civilian evacuation ships reached the jump point and escaped to friendly space. The Vorthak threat to this sector had been eliminated. But Commander Zexara found herself wondering if they had solved one problem only to create a much bigger one. News of the Kepler victory spread through both Coalition and Vorthak space like wildfire. For the first time in 10 years, An enemy fleet had not just been defeated, but completely destroyed. The impossible had happened, and nobody knew what it meant. On the Vorthak homeworld, High Commander Thexval studied the battle recordings with growing disbelief. The crystalline being's body pulsed with angry red light as he watched primitive ships tear apart a battle group that should have been invincible. "Run it again," he commanded his tactical staff. For the 7th time, the holographic display showed the human attack. Each viewing made it more disturbing. The enemy showed no formation discipline, no regard for proper tactics, no concern for crew survival. They fought like rabid animals using their own ships as weapons. "Analysis," Thexval demanded. His chief strategist, a younger Vorthak named Krillnex, hesitated before speaking. "High Commander, these humans appear to follow no recognized pattern of warfare. They sacrifice valuable assets for minimal tactical gain. Their behavior is completely irrational." "Irrational opponents can still be defeated," Thexval replied. "What are their weaknesses?" "Their ships are primitive and poorly armored. Their weapons are crude. Their crews are small and undertrained. By all logical measures, they should be easy to destroy. Yet they destroyed Battle Group 7 without losing a single engagement," Thexval pointed out. His body pulsed brighter red. "Find me something useful." Meanwhile, in Coalition space, the humans were busy teaching their new allies exactly what they meant by fighting dirty. Colonel Danny Wright had taken over training duties for Coalition forces, and his lessons were unlike anything the aliens had ever experienced. "You think too much," Wright told a group of Astari pilots during a tactical briefing. The former Marine was a compact man with scars on his hands and a voice that carried absolute authority. "While you're calculating optimal firing solutions, your enemy is putting bullets in your brain." Captain Veltar shifted uncomfortably on his perch. "Colonel Wright, we cannot simply abandon proven tactics in favor of random aggression." "Random?" Wright laughed. "Nothing random about it. We hit fast, hit hard, and keep hitting until the other guy stops moving. That's not random. That's efficient." The alien pilots looked confused. Their entire military education was based on careful planning, coordinated attacks, and minimizing casualties. The human approach seemed to contradict everything they had learned. Wright pulled up a holographic display showing the Kepler battle. "Watch Captain Phillips here. Looks like he's just charging in without a plan, right? Wrong. He's calculating exactly where the enemy will focus their fire, then using that focus against them. When they commit to shooting at him, they can't respond to attacks from other directions." Dr. Lisa Grant was conducting her own research in the Coalition's medical bays. She had been studying the different alien species, trying to understand their physical and psychological limitations. Her findings were disturbing. "Admiral Morrison," she reported during their daily briefing, "we have a problem. These species are all evolved from peaceful environments. Their fight-or-flight responses are almost entirely weighted toward flight. When faced with serious danger, their instinct is to retreat and regroup, not to attack." Morrison nodded grimly. He was reading intelligence reports about Vorthak fleet movements. The enemy was massing forces for a major counterattack. "Can we train it out of them?" "Not in the time we have. It's genetic. Millions of years of evolution on garden worlds where cooperation was more valuable than aggression." Grant paused, then added, "There's something else. The Vorthak are showing signs of psychological trauma from the Kepler engagement. They've never faced an enemy that fights the way we do." "Good," Morrison replied. "Fear makes people stupid." The Vorthak proved his point 3 days later when they launched their counterattack. Instead of the careful, methodical advance that had served them so well against Coalition forces, they came in fast and angry. 3 full battle groups, 60 ships in total, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Titan Nebula, where the human fleet had taken refuge. High Commander Thexval led the attack personally, his flagship at the center of a massive formation, designed to overwhelm the human forces through sheer firepower. It was exactly the kind of conventional attack the humans had been hoping for. "Contacts inbound," reported Lieutenant Walsh from her position on the bridge of the UES Vengeance. 60 ships, standard Vorthak formation. They're coming straight at us." Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display with the calm expression of a man who had been expecting this moment. Perfect. They're angry and predictable. Let's use that. The Titan Nebula was a perfect place for an ambush. Clouds of ionized gas interfered with sensors and communications. Electromagnetic storms could hide ship signatures and disrupt targeting systems. Most importantly, it was filled with debris from ancient battles that could be turned into weapons. The humans had spent weeks preparing the Nebula for this fight. They had seeded it with improvised mines, hidden weapon platforms, and debris fields that looked natural but were actually carefully positioned kill zones. When the Vorthak fleet entered the Nebula, they weren't just facing 15 human ships. They were facing an entire star system that had been turned into a weapon. Captain Jenny Brooks commanded the UES Rattlesnake, a converted cargo hauler that shouldn't have lasted 5 minutes against a Vorthak cruiser. But she had learned something during her years hauling freight through dangerous systems. Big things were slow to turn, and slow things were easy to kill if you were fast enough and crazy enough. Her ship darted through the nebula like a hunting animal, using the gas clouds for cover. When a Vorthak destroyer came too close, she emerged from hiding and raked its hull with railgun fire before disappearing back into the electromagnetic soup. "This is Rattlesnake," her voice crackled over the radio. "Splash 1 destroyer, moving to secondary position." The Vorthak formation, designed for open space combat, began to fall apart in the confusing environment of the nebula. Ships lost contact with their command structure. Targeting systems malfunctioned in the electromagnetic storms. What should have been a coordinated assault became a confused brawl. Captain Tony Martinez commanded a ship that had started life as a mining vessel and been converted into something that barely qualified as a warship. The UES Bulldog carried more explosives than armor, but Martinez had learned that sometimes the best defense was making sure the other guy was too busy exploding to shoot back. When 3 Vorthak ships cornered him near an asteroid field, Martinez did something that horrified every civilized observer. He detonated his own cargo bay, turning his ship into a massive fragmentation bomb. The explosion tore through enemy shields and sent chunks of metal flying at relativistic speeds. "Bulldog to all units." Martinez's voice came over the radio, strained but alive. "Lost main cargo bay and half my hull, but I'm still flying. These crystal ships don't like rocks moving really fast." High Commander Thexval watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos. His ships were being picked off one by an enemy that refused to fight a proper battle. Every time his forces tried to coordinate an attack, the humans would fade back into the nebula only to emerge somewhere else entirely. "All ships, maintain formation," he commanded over the communication system. "Hi, Commander," came the reply from one of his captains. "We cannot maintain formation in this environment. Our sensors are being jammed by electromagnetic interference." "Then adapt," Thexval snapped. "We have superior numbers and firepower. Victory is assured." But victory was anything but assured. The humans had turned the entire nebula into a maze of death traps. Ancient asteroids had been rigged with explosives. Disabled ships had been converted into remote-controlled bombs. Even the gas clouds themselves had been weaponized, seeded, with metallic particles that could shred hull plating at high velocity. Lieutenant Walsh coordinated the chaos from the UES Vengeance, turning what looked like random attacks into a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. "All units, the enemy flagship is moving toward Grid 7. Recommend convergence on that position." The surviving human ships, most of them damaged beyond what any rational crew would consider operational, began moving toward the Vorthak flagship. They came from all directions at once, using the nebula's interference to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Captain Phillips, somehow still alive, despite his ship being held together mostly by determination and hull patches, opened fire on the flagship's escort vessels. "This is Hammer. I've got maybe 10 minutes of life support left, but their shields are down on the port side." The battle reached its climax when Admiral Morrison made a decision that would have resulted in court-martial in any civilized navy. He ordered all remaining ships to ram the enemy flagship simultaneously, turning the engagement into a collision course that would likely kill everyone involved. "All ships, this is Morrison. Final attack run. If we don't take out their command, ship now, They'll regroup and hit our colonies. This is our one chance. The Vorthak flagship, a beautiful crystal cathedral that had never been seriously damaged in 50 years of conquest, found itself facing 8 human ships accelerating toward it on suicide courses. 6 months after the humans arrived, the Vorthak Empire was falling apart. What had once been the most feared military force in the galaxy was now a collection of frightened fleets hiding in distant systems, afraid to engage an enemy they couldn't understand or predict. On the bridge of the UES Payback, a captured Vorthak heavy cruiser that Admiral Morrison had claimed as his new flagship, the human commander studied intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The ship's crystal walls had been covered with crude human modifications, turning a work of art into a practical weapon of war. "Report from Earth Command just came in," announced Lieutenant Walsh, reading from her datapad. "Second wave fleet has left Sol system. 50,000 volunteers aboard converted civilian ships. Estimated arrival time is 2 weeks." Morrison nodded grimly. The first wave had broken the Vorthak military machine, but finishing the job would require more ships and crews than his battered fleet could provide. "What's the status of our current forces?" 8 ships still operational, but barely," Walsh replied. "We've got crews manning vessels that should have been scrapped months ago. Half our people are running on stimulants and determination. Dr. Lisa Grant looked up from her research station, where she had been studying captured Vorthak technology. "Admiral, I've been analyzing their communications traffic. The Empire is fragmenting. Some groups want to negotiate surrender. Others are demanding the use of planet-killing weapons. A few factions are suggesting they abandon this region of space entirely." "Good," Morrison said. "Fear makes people make bad decisions. Keep monitoring their chatter. Any sign they're planning something desperate, let me know immediately." The desperate thing came sooner than expected. A transmission arrived at Coalition headquarters 3 days later. Broadcast, on all frequencies from the Vorthak homeworld itself. The message was brief and terrifying. High Commander Thexval appeared on the screen, his crystalline body pulsing with angry red light. Behind him stood the surviving members of the Vorthak High Council, their faces showing the strain of months of defeat and humiliation. "To the humans and their coalition allies," Thexval began, his voice carrying barely controlled rage. "You have violated every law of civilized warfare. You fight without honor, without mercy, without any regard for the proper conduct of military operations. You are savages who have somehow acquired spaceflight." Commander Zexara watched the transmission from New Haven Station, feeling her skin shift to worried purple. She had a bad feeling about where this was heading. "Therefore," Thexval continued, "we see no choice but to respond in kind. Our survey ships have located your homeworld, this Earth you cherish so much. If you do not surrender immediately and submit to proper judgment for your crimes against civilization, we will deploy our stellar converters against your primitive planet. You have 72 hours to comply." The transmission ended, leaving the Coalition Command Center in stunned silence. The Vorthak had just threatened to destroy humanity's homeworld with weapons that could turn a star into a supernova. It was the most extreme escalation possible, the kind of threat that should have ended the war immediately. Instead, Admiral Morrison's response was broadcast 2 hours later. He appeared calm and relaxed as he sat in the command chair of his captured ship, showing no sign of the fear or desperation the Vorthak expected. "High Commander Thexval," Morrison began, his voice carrying the same conversational tone he might use to discuss dinner plans. "Thank you for telling us where your homeworld is. We've been looking for it for months. Also, thank you for giving us a 72-hour deadline. That's exactly how long we need to get there." He paused, and his expression grew colder. "You seem to think threatening our planet will make us surrender. You're wrong. Threatening our families just made this personal." The transmission ended with coordinates for the Vorthak homeworld and a simple message. "All human forces converge on target. Maximum aggression authorized." What followed was the largest military mobilization in human history. The second wave, fleet 50,000 volunteers aboard every civilian ship that could be fitted with weapons, changed course for the Vorthak homeworld, Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even luxury yachts had been converted into warships by crews that understood they were racing to save their planet. Captain Bill Carter commanded a converted cruise ship called the UES Democracy. His crew consisted of retired veterans, civilian volunteers, and anyone else who wanted to fight. The ship's ballrooms had been turned into weapons bays, and its swimming pools now housed missile launchers. "This is democracy to all units," Carter broadcast as the massive fleet approached the Vorthak system. "Remember, they threatened our families. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors who won't surrender." The Vorthak homeworld was protected by the largest defensive fleet in their history. 300 ships surrounded the crystal cities that covered the planet's surface. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons designed to destroy entire fleets. The system's asteroid belt had been turned into a fortress. It should have been impossible to break through such defenses. Any rational enemy would have retreated or tried to negotiate. The humans attacked from every direction at once. Captain Sarah Kim led a squadron of converted mining ships in a direct assault on the orbital platforms. Her vessels were crude and ugly compared to the beautiful Vorthak defenses, but they carried something the enemy couldn't match: crews that had grown up on a world where everything was trying to kill them. "This is Kim to Mining Squadron," she broadcast as her ships charged into the teeth of the orbital defenses. "Remember, we're not trying to win pretty. We're trying to win fast. Hit anything that looks important and keep hitting it until it stops." Shooting back. The Vorthak defenders fought with desperate courage, but they were facing an enemy that had learned warfare in the hardest school in the galaxy. Human ships rammed through defensive lines, using their own hulls as battering rams. When conventional weapons failed, crews improvised new ones from whatever materials they could find. Colonel Wright led a boarding action against the main command station, his Marines fighting through crystal corridors with weapons that seemed primitive compared to Vorthak technology. But primitive weapons still killed when used by people who understood violence better than their opponents. "Station secured," Wright reported as his forces reached the command center. "Enemy commander is requesting terms of surrender." "No terms," came Morrison's reply from the payback as his ship fought through the inner defenses. "Unconditional surrender, or we keep shooting." The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships, most of them civilian vessels that had no business being in a war zone, fought with suicidal determination against defenses that had never been breached. They lost hundreds of ships, but they kept coming. Dr. Grant, monitoring communications, from her position aboard the Payback, made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral, I'm picking up transmissions from the planet's surface. The Vorthak civilian population is calling for their military to surrender. They're terrified of what we'll do if this continues." Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone, including his own crew. Instead of continuing the attack, he broadcast a message to the entire Vorthak system. "This is Admiral Morrison to all Vorthak forces. Your military has been defeated. Your homeworld's defenses have fallen. But we're not here to destroy your people. We're here to end a war. Surrender now and your civilians will be protected. Continue fighting, and we'll finish what you started." High Commander Thexval, trapped in his command bunker as human forces, landed on the planet's surface, finally understood what he was facing. These weren't conquerors seeking glory or territory. They were exterminators who had come to solve a problem. The problem was the Vorthak Empire's threat to their homeworld. The surrender came 6 hours later. The most powerful military force in the galaxy laid down its weapons and submitted to beings they had dismissed as primitive barbarians. The Vorthak Empire, which had ruled 17 star systems for decades, ceased to exist. But the real shock came 3 weeks later, when the EID human fleet prepared to leave. Commander Zexara expected them to claim territory, demand tribute, or establish some kind of occupation force. Instead, Admiral Morrison simply announced that Earth's job was done. "The threat to our homeworld has been eliminated," he said during the final briefing. "The Vorthak Empire no longer exists. The galaxy is safe from their aggression. Our mission is complete." "What about governing the conquered territories?" asked Captain Veltar. Morrison looked puzzled by the question. "That's not our job. We came here to solve a problem, not to build an empire. You called for help, we provided it. Now we're going home." Dr. Grant made her final log entry as the human fleet prepared for departure. The galaxy called for heroes. They got us instead. We're not heroes in any traditional sense. We're just people who understand that sometimes the only way to protect something you love is to become something terrible. The galaxy is safer now, but they'll never look at humanity the same way again. The last scene showed the UES Payback, its crystal hull scarred by battle and covered in human modifications, leading the fleet toward the edge of known space. Behind them, the galaxy began the long process of rebuilding,